We all know she'll be out in the community one day, that's inevitable. And what kind of person is she going to be? What kind of adult is she going to be?
Girls who kill girls is very unusual indeed. Girls who kill strangers, even more unusual.
Right.
And a 12-year-old girl to kill an 18-year-old, a child to kill an adult who they'd never met before, is unique is the only word.
Childhood is a time to enjoy fun, laughter, growing up, and discovering the path to adulthood. But sometimes a poor home life or traumatic experiences can often change a child's perception on life, leaving them facing some very difficult adult experiences, way beyond their years. And every now and then, children can perform disturbing acts that will not only change their childhood but also their lives when children decide it's time to kill. Today, we look at the case of Catherine Jones. She began to experience abuse in the home. After the system failed her, she turned to her brother Curtis, and together they made a deadly pact that would shock a nation and destroy an entire family. Love, a confusing time for any 12-year-old, especially Jasmine Richardson, who became enamored with a boy who was not only older than her, he was nearly twice her age. When their forbidden love is found out, her parents intervene. But that intervention would come at a fatal price, as Jasmine and her boyfriend planned to continue their romance by those who opposed them. And finally, there's the case of Sharon Carr, who killed an 18-year-old that was just walking home after a night out on the town. Her cold-blooded actions went unpunished for years until this young killer was brought to justice and became known as the Devil's Daughter. Let's not waste time as we jump into the sinister world of 12-year-old girls who became savage killers.
At one point, I was just so happy to be away, and I know that sounds really, really messed up, but there was just some point where I was just away from all that, and I was by myself, and I was safe.
January 6, 1999, police received a disturbing 911 call and attended a residence in Florida. Inside lay the body of Nicole Speight. In a horrifying sight, Nicole had been gunned down in an apartment robbery gone wrong, but soon this investigation would take a sinister turn. Curtis was not present at the time of the murder, and although it's unclear if he was there when police arrived, it was clear who was missing: his two young children, Curtis, 12, and Catherine, 13. Even more alarming, a neighbor told the police they had seen the children flee the scene after admitting they fired the fatal shot that took Nicole's life. The morning of January 7, 1999, the two children were found hiding out in a nearby woodland. What happened next shocked not only the community but an entire nation, as Curtis and Catherine were arrested, becoming America's youngest people charged with first-degree murder.
I actually took the fingerprints off the gun and wiped it down. And I told my brother that he got hysterical. He had an emotional breakdown because, once again, this is reality now. This isn't some idea that's in our head anymore. This is reality.
A deal was struck that would allow them to be tried for second-degree murder. With this, they would go on to face 18 years behind bars and a life on probation. But there would be no trial. With Curtis and Catherine remaining tight-lipped about their motive for the killing, only saying it was an accident, the authorities assumed they had become jealous of their father's girlfriend and decided to take her out of the picture forever. But it wasn't until years later when the true heartbreaking story came out, revealing a system that failed them more than once and a lack of proper safeguarding that left these two kids around an abusive relative with no one to turn to but each other. The children's parents met when their mother, Stacy Parks, who was 17 at the time, met Curtis Jones Sr., who was 23 at the time, at a fast food restaurant. They were soon dating, and in only 6 months in their relationship, Stacy fell pregnant with Catherine. Curtis was violent towards Stacy both before and during the pregnancy, which many suspect led to the premature birth of their first child. Around a year later, Curtis was born, and by 1989, the couple were married. It lasted only a couple of months before Stacy left Curtis for good. Her own family did not want her to bring her children, so she left them with their father and went home to Kansas. Not long after the breakup, Curtis was arrested over shooting that was eventually ruled self-defense. It was during this time that the children were left with their grandmother, where they would stay for a while. At the same time, a family member moved into the area, and while Curtis Jr. was in Kansas with his mother, he made a claim that would open an investigation. The findings of that report are truly shocking. Curtis Jr. had made allegations that the family member in question sometimes fondles him when they are in bed together, but then later claimed he made it all up, either to get rid of the relative so he and his sister would be sent to live with their mother.
At the time, I did not know that my brother was also being.
This case was closed and no further action was taken, but this would not be the first time child services were called to visit this troublesome household. In a disturbing twist to the case, the family member accused of the abuse was convicted of intercourse with an underage girl, a conviction that adds another dark chapter to this family's story.
When they said that they would take us out of the house, I denied it. I said, no, never mind. I don't want to push through with this, even though, in the report, they said there were indicators. And my brother told me he believed me. And he said, I know it's true because it's happened to me too.
Just months before the murder of Nicole Speight, Catherine ran away from home. When she returned, child welfare followed up on information from one of her teachers who suspected she was being abused. Evidence was found, but Catherine denied anything had happened. She later revealed the truth of the sickening. Her heartbreaking allegations include being made to perform acts until she was ready to vomit, and they would fondle and touch Catherine inappropriately. She also claimed her father made her deny the as he simply didn't believe it had happened. Catherine later spoke of how no one believed her except just one person, her brother. All it took was one incident that tipped these kids over the edge and turned them into killers.
We're best friends.
While Catherine was innocently getting a shower, the relative in question sneaked into the bathroom and pleasured themselves while watching her in the shower. She cried, unable to stop them or even do anything about it. It was after this Catherine began to spend more time alone and came up with a plan that would finally end the but leave 4 people dead. January 6, 1999, Nicole calmly works on a jigsaw puzzle in the dining room table. Unbeknownst to her, this day was about to turn deadly. She was the only adult in the house at the time. Curtis, with one of his father's handguns hidden on his lap, waited and sat on the table.
He in the chest, and she tried to grab the phone, and I went and took the phone, and I took it to the back room, and I came back, and I can't say how many more times he fired the gun.
It must have been a terrifying ordeal as Curtis opened fired, hitting her with 4 of the 9 bullets he fired. At this point, the children began to freak out and attempted to cover their tracks. They placed her lifeless body into the bathroom and then cleaned the house of blood. It was only a short time later they knocked on the door of a neighbor and revealed they had shot Nicole and then left to hide in the woods. These 2 children had a list of 4 people, but after murdering Nicole, they could take no more. Years after that fatal day, Catherine wrote a book and finally opened up. Catherine and Curtis have since been released. Their controversial trial and conviction will remain talked about for years to come. Curtis left prison as an ordained minister, and Catherine left having met and fallen in love while incarcerated. She met Navy officer Senior Chief Ramus Fleming, and the 2 have since been married. She has since expressed regret over the murder, and both were able to enjoy their 30s and beyond without fear of abuse, but with a long road to go before they are integrated into normal life once again. These 2 kids felt that they had no choice but to act after systematic failures by the authorities to delve deeper into their case. But that is nothing compared to the next case, and the reasons a 12-year-old girl committed murder will shock you to the core.
The now 16-year-old girl is currently in close custody at the Alberta Hospital in Edmonton. In order to begin her reintegration, her treatment team and her lawyers say she needs more exposure to the outside world.
When kids kill, it's always shocking. When kids kill their own parents, it's heartbreaking and tragic. Some kill because of or a tough upbringing, and some kill for one of the most powerful feelings of all, love. April 23, 2006. Officer Second Diak attends a 911 call in Medicine Hat, Canada. The community of 60,000 led a relatively peaceful life, But that peace was about to be shattered. As Officer Second Diak entered the house of the Richardson family, he came across a horrific discovery that no one could ever be prepared to see. In the basement of the home lay the bodies of Mark and Deborah Richardson. Deborah had been 12 times, and Mark, despite trying to defend himself, was 24 times. But the worst was yet to come. In one of the bedrooms, the officer found Jacob Tyler, 8 years old. He was one of the children of Mark and Deborah, but tragically, he was also dead. He had been and had his throat cut in a terrifying end to this young boy's life. Reportedly, his bed was soaked in his own dried. Second Diak feared the worst for the remaining family member, Jasmine, who is nowhere to be found. But evidence soon pointed to the unthinkable. Jasmine looked like the prime suspect in her own family's murder. When they found her, she was with her boyfriend. They were both arrested, and in a shocking twist, they both confessed to the killings. But what could have turned this happy and social 12-year-old into a cold-hearted killer? Her behavior changed one night when she met the man she would do anything for, including committing murder. Jeremy Steinecke was 23 when he caught the eye of 12-year-old Jasmine at a music gig. He had not long split up with his fiancée and reportedly began to slip down a very dark path in life. Steinecke had grown up with a history of alcohol problems and abuse in his family. He wasn't popular at school and had attempted at least once. At 13, he took on the persona of centuries-old werewolf and wore a vial of blood on a chain around his neck. He lived a goth lifestyle, and that lifestyle appealed to Jasmine. Enamored by Jeremy, they quickly began seeing each other, and when her parents found out, they banned her from seeing him. You'd expect Steinecke to be angry at the interventions, but what he wrote on his blog is not only shocking, but a sinister premonition of things that were yet to come. My lovers' rents are totally unfair. They say that they really care, they don't know what is going on, they just assume. Their throats I want to slit. Finally there shall be silence. Their blood shall be payment. Jasmine's transformation took only a few months. She wore risky clothing, talked about her love of piercings, and chatted on forums around goth culture. Nobody was going to stop her from seeing the man she loved, and some disturbing conversations took place between them. Emails later retrieved by investigators showed Jasmine was the first to suggest an insidious plan that would ensure that these two lovers could be together forever. She wrote that it begins with me killing them and ends up with me living with you. Now, any normal 23-year-old might want to try to talk Jasmine out of this disturbing kind of conversation, but Jeremy's reply tells us all we need to know about his state of mind. He tells Jasmine, "Well, I love your plan, but we need to get a little more creative with the details and stuff." The two also spoke to friends about their desire to take out her parents, but they never took them seriously enough to take action. But the plan seemed to come together the day before the murders, when Jeremy was watching one of his favorite films, Natural Born Killers, and one whose plot would soon become real life, as it became the direct inspiration for the pair to finally enact their plan. In their confession after the arrest, Jeremy admitted killing her parents, while Jasmine admitted to taking the life of her very own brother. Both were charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, but Jasmine's identity would be protected because of her age. In fact, she was simply known as JR, which is kind of unusual as it was pretty obvious it was Jasmine by using her initials. Both would face separate trials and would face the consequences of their actions. Jeremy was looking at the longest sentence. He was facing 25 years without parole if found guilty. Jasmine, however, even though she came up with the idea and showed no remorse, well, she was looking at a maximum of 10 years and only 6 of those behind bars. June 14th, 2007 would see the first of the trials, and it was Jasmine who faced a judge first. She pleaded not guilty, claiming she had only spoken of killing her parents and never really meant to do it. She even claimed Jeremy had made her kill her own brother after she comforted him while their parents were being. But evidence found at her house, witness testimony, and her own digital footprint left only one verdict, and that was guilty. So she would be sentenced to 10 years, 6 of those in prison, the remaining 4 on supervision. Hardly seems like a fair punishment after such a callous act of brutal violence. But the hope was that her rehabilitation would work and she could re-enter the community again.
The girls' team says they are continuing to assess her and stress that any reintegration will be done in baby steps, starting with walks around the facility, going into other buildings in the facility before going out into the Edmonton community.
Over a year later, Jeremy faced trial at last. On the stand, he blamed Jasmine and told the court she had controlled him. He claimed he thought she was older than 12, but again, the evidence was too strong against him. On December 4th, 2008, the jury found him guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. His sentence, life with a chance of parole in 25 years.
Appreciate, of course, that she's been in custody for 4 years, and it's a big 4 years given that she's now 16, and so certainly there have been a number of changes, and as the treatment team indicated, she's not in a normal situation, and so she's a very different person now than she was then.
I have every confidence in the Solicitor General's department. I work with them every day, and so I have every confidence that whatever risk is presented to the public will be very carefully managed, and no changes will occur without them making sure that the whole community is safe.
On her release, Jasmine was given a new identity and became a success of the rehabilitation program. She was working hard and supporting herself and trying to turn her life around for the better. But nothing you've seen so far will prepare you for the next horrifying tale of brutal murder.
When we see women kill, we see them use generally just enough violence to get the job done. They won't use something called overkill. They won't have somebody time after time after time. They won't, their body.
This is Sharon Louise Carr, and in June 1994, she attacked a pupil at Collingwood Comprehensive in Surrey, England. The knife attack, for no apparent reason, brought about the arrest of Sharon. Anne-Marie Clifford several times and then stood over her watching her die. Thankfully, Anne-Marie would survive, but without the mental and physical scars she must have endured.
It said very clearly that she looked up and Carr was standing over her with the knife, sort of juggling it from one hand to another. And she was smiling.
This troublesome young Sharon Louise Carr would find herself convicted and sentenced to serve time at Bulwood Hall Young Offenders Institute, where she would make a confession so shocking you won't believe it's true. Sharon was claiming to be responsible for a murder as yet unsolved from 4 years earlier. When investigators dug deeper, they uncovered the writings of a psychopathic killer who enjoyed their work. She had implicated herself in the death of an 18-year-old, a murder so bloody it sent shockwaves around the United Kingdom, and gave a country their youngest ever murderer. Summer 1992, Katie Ratcliffe, fresh from a split with her boyfriend, was out enjoying a night with friends at the local Ragamuffin Club. After the club closed, Katie decided to walk home instead of taking a cab. This decision would prove fatal, and this bright young woman would never make it back home that night. She was found around 3 miles away from the club in a place called Farnborough. When police arrived at the scene, they found the sickening sight of Katie lying in a pool of her own blood. She had died from almost 30 wounds to her body. But on further investigation, they found she had wounds to her and other areas that originally led the police to believe this was motivated. They also suspected a full-grown man was responsible due to the strength needed to overpower Katie.
You're thinking, can a 12-year-old girl drag an 18-year-old? That would have taken some dragging.
This assumption meant that their inquiries were aimed at males in the area.
For the investigating police, Katie's death was one of mystery. However, the primary evidence, the frenzied attack, would point to a male. It would point to perhaps a male in their 30s. It would point to someone who was physically capable of dragging Katie from the one killing location to her final resting place.
Little did the police know that the culprit, unable to keep quiet, would eventually lead the police to their door, where they would finally meet the girl who would become known as the Devil's Daughter. When police discover her diaries during her incarceration at Bullwood Hall, they would not only find evidence of the murder, but a series of chilling diary entries that allowed them to see inside the mind of the United Kingdom's youngest killer ever. She wrote that, "I was born to be a murderer. Killing for me is a mass turn on. It just makes me so high, I never want to come down. Every night I see the devil in my dreams, sometimes even in the mirror, but I realize it's just me." When questioned, she also had 3 different versions of the murder and implicated 2 males in the crime, who were later cleared by the police. But as experts have pointed out, the possibility of a car being involved would explain why she was found at that location 3 miles away, but also leaves further questions.
So who was driving the car? Not a 12-year-old girl. It had to be one, possibly 2 men in the car.
The one consistency of all her accounts was that she had repeatedly Katie. The irrefutable evidence against her came when Sharon, who was only 12 at the time of the murder, described parts of the murder and details of the crime scene that police had specifically kept out of the press, meaning she only could have known if she was there at the time. She reportedly showed very little emotion towards her victims and showed a frightening lack of remorse. She had even bragged to other inmates about the crime on several occasions. During the time she was questioned and charged, she continued to write sadistic diary entries of the most disturbing content with no shame at all. 1997, 5 years after the murder of Katie Ratcliffe, the killer was finally brought before the Winchester Crown Court in a 4-week trial that caused a media frenzy. Not surprisingly, Sharon was found guilty on March 25, 1997, and would face a minimum of 14 years in prison. She smiled for the camera as she was taken away in one final rebellious move. She did manage to have the sentence reduced to 12 years in 2003 after an appeal by her lawyers. She has since applied for release and been denied. It is reported she has fantasized about killing another inmate. When the judge found this information out, he had no choice but to deny the motion. Years after the arrest, she was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, which causes frenzied behavior that might help explain this girl's murderous tendencies.
Schizoaffective disorder is a combination of schizophrenia, a psychosis, and a mood disorder. So affective means the mood disorder. So along with delusions, paranoia, hallucinations that we associate with schizophrenia, you have either depression or mania and depression, as in bipolar disorder, so the combination of those things.
Sharon Louise Carr is still attempting to bid for release, but we can only hope this dangerous killer stays where she belongs, locked up safely behind bars. Each of these cases brings a different element of tragedy. Sometimes the system fails, sometimes the parents fail, and sometimes there is no reasonable explanation as to why a child of only 12 years old would resort to murder, and sometimes even enjoy it. Let me know what you think of these cases in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to keep up with the world's most brutal crimes.